Making Your Marriage Work with your host, Steve and Connie Corona.
Hello, welcome to Making Your Marriage Work. I'm Connie Corona. And we have again with us a special guest, Janet Fritz. She represents Rosen Divorce Law Firm, an unlikely guest to have on a Making Your Marriage Work show. Tell us a little bit about your law firm.
Well, I'm glad to be here, and thank you for having me. I work with Rosen Divorce. You can find us on rosendivorce.com. We actually have a wealth of information there on separation and divorce and a lot of resources. We have offices in Raleigh and in Charlotte, hopefully soon statewide, so that we can help everybody there. But I'm just excited to be here. We actually started partnering and contacted your church because we're interested in trying to make marriages work and not necessarily tearing them down.
Tell me a little bit about why would you want to partner with a church, a divorce law firm?
That's a great question. The truth is, number one, I'm called to do divorce law. I wish I was called to do corporate law, but I'm not. I'm called to do divorce law because that's where my heart is. I want to help people in need, and I want to be blessed. And I realized one day while praying that God was going to bless me by helping to build up marriages and not tear them down. And I have a unique ability to do that where I am. So I found, I asked myself, where am I going to be able to find partners in doing that? And that's when I contacted y'all, knowing that you guys are out there trying to make marriages work.
Wow, that's exciting. I tell you what, it is really exciting because many times we do have to refer somebody. In some situations, we have a situation, we have a person come in and they really don't have any other alternative but to pursue either a divorce or a separation. And I've always been at a loss as to where to send them. But so now I know I can send them to someone who is going to work together with me to try and save their marriage if it's at all savable. So,
well, and I appreciate that trust.
That's wonderful. On our last program, we talked a little bit about how Jesus viewed divorce and why there's a law in the Bible allowing divorce, and the fact that it's because of the hardness of men's hearts that God allowed divorce to take place in the first place. And we talked about the fact that the hardness of heart is referring to our unwillingness to be open and yielded to God. And so a lot of times when people come into your establishment, their hearts are hardened, aren't they?
Almost everybody that walks into our office has a hardened heart, and that's a tough situation because they've stopped trusting their spouse. A lot of times they've stopped wanting to work things out. And the Bible has some great principles for how to make your marriage work. It's really a guidebook for how a good marriage should go. So sometimes helping them to realize that maybe a temporary separation is the way to go for now until they can get back on track, following those principles. If we can help them do that, that's a win for us.
Yes. Now, one of the things, before we get into the separation, I wanted to finish up with reasons why a divorce might be necessary. And we talked about two reasons last time, mainly with sexual unfaithfulness in the marriage and the fact that it's not going to stop, it's going to continue. And we also talked about how their firm can connect you with people and organizations that can help you even with sexual addiction type situations. And they've seen successful marriages survive even in that situation. But the other thing I wanted to talk to you about today was when an unbelieving spouse just chooses to leave. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, we see a reference to where Paul is saying, if you're married to an unbeliever, it's okay. You should stay married to them unless they want to depart. But if they choose to depart, and then it's okay. He says then you're free. You're loosed from your connection with them. You're free from your commitment. And so a lot of times I see in a situation where a spouse decides to leave. Now that word unbelieving does not necessarily mean they don't believe in God. The word unbelieving means, the word is apisto, which is a Greek word that means not faithful, trustworthy, believing, sure, or true. Believing is one word in all those things. The other ones are faithful and trustworthy and true. And so a person that you're living with that's not faithful, trustworthy, and true, who decides they're going to leave, and walk out the door and take their stuff and maybe go live with someone else. This is a situation where Paul says you're not bound in that situation. You're free. Do you have situations where that happens?
I think all the time. I think a lot of clients come in and they not only have spouses that won't go to church with them and won't tithe and won't help them do that, but on top of that, they have spouses that hinder their faith and their belief in God. And when a spouse chooses to walk away from the marriage, that other spouse sometimes feels like, well, I'm a Christian, I can't get divorced. And I think that God has provided for them to do that and to maybe even find a believing spouse the next time so that they're evenly yoked, which, as we know, means, walking like two oxes together, pulling a cart so that they're both even. One's not pulling more than the other.
And I've seen people in this situation where somebody just walked away from them and just stay in this devastated place, because they keep reading this scripture in Matthew chapter 10, where Jesus said, if you divorce and marry again, you're an adulterer. But he's not. What he's talking about is divorcing for the purpose of marrying again, divorcing because you have somebody else you prefer to be with. That's what he's talking about. He's not, dooming you to spending the rest of your life alone and miserable because somebody left you. That's not God's intent.
No, it's not allowing you to shop for a new spouse.
Yeah,
that's what God doesn't want us to do.
That's right. And so this is another reason why sometimes divorce is necessary. When that spouse walks away and they're not coming back, and there's you've done everything you can do, and there's no way to get them back, no way to fix the situation. We've been talking about divorce. Let's talk a little bit about separation.
Okay.
A lot of times people come to me with a situation like, for instance, drug addiction, alcohol addiction. Maybe there's serious abuse going on in the marriage. Maybe there is infidelity taking place, but there's still a chance that maybe things can be worked out. Right. Or even in a situation where a spouse is involved in criminal activity.
Those are tough situations.
Those types of situations. And if there's not really scriptural grounds for a divorce, oftentimes I will just say, you know what, you need to pull away. The reason I do that is because I've seen too many people stay in an abusive situation and very difficult things happen. They've been harmed physically, emotionally, or their children have been devastated by that type of thing. And I found, as I prayed about it in the Word, that God, there are places in the Bible where a woman made a decision, or a person made a decision to pull out of a marriage for a season, or to make a break, or to change the way they normally did things in a marriage. Abigail in 1 Samuel chapter 25 decided to save her family rather than submit to her husband. If she had submitted to her husband and did what he wanted to do, her family would have been completely wiped out. And so she decided to take things and do what she needed to do. Also in the story about Korah in the Old Testament, where Moses said, you all, those that are with Korah, get on his side, and those that are with Moses, get on his side. And the ones with Korah, the earth opened him up and swallowed him up because he was a bad guy. Well, his family got over there with him, his wife included. She had a choice. She could have stood with Moses, but she stood with Korah, and the earth swallowed her up. And of course, we got Sapphira in the New Testament, who agreed with her husband in a dishonest endeavor, and she ended up dying right along with him. So there are times when we need to separate.
Absolutely.
There are times when we need to separate, and it's important. What are some of the things that people can do?
I tend to believe that when they're coming to my office, sometimes it's a time for separation. And I tend to believe that because there's almost always gambling, abusive language in the house, and I'm not talking just about profanity, but when a spouse says stuff like, you're useless, you're worthless to me, you're not a good parent, or they're very mentally cruel to that person, that they need to time apart. They need to figure out, are those true statements? Are they telling me the truth? Do they care about me? And how can I help that? So I tend to think if there's abuse, which I'll term both physical, meaning somebody's hitting you or somebody's threatening to hit you, or if there's verbal abuse, I think absolutely that we're going to need some time apart. In addition to that, I think if there's gambling or spending the inheritance of your children, I think that that's important, that we have some time apart to get everybody's spending under control. Separation should be about separating and then getting things under control with a focus on reconciliation.
Okay. And so how many of the people that come to your office, what percentage would you say do you recommend separation rather than divorce?
By the time that they're in my office, I will tell you I recommend almost 99.9% that they separate. And the reason is that they're in a crisis. They wouldn't be there if they weren't in a crisis, because they're going to spend some money to come in. Our initial consultation fee is $300. So they're spending some money to come see me because they're in a crisis. So 99%, I would say that they're going to separate for a time, but we have to figure out for them, should there be a focus on reuniting with their spouse, and when should that occur? That's got to be a key question in our consultation.
Okay. Well, out of those people that choose to separate, what percentage would you say actually save their marriage?
Unfortunately, I have to say that's a smaller percentage. I'd say maybe 5 to 15%, depending on the month. Sometimes we have better months than others.
Really?
But we have to remember that if parties are at the crisis point when they're in our office and they're saying, I'm ready to go, I'm looking at another apartment, I'm looking at this other person to cheat on my spouse, I ask them to look at themselves and say, what things do I have to worry about if I leave? And I haven't got a legal representation agreement, or I haven't got an attorney on my side. They're going to be worried about finances. They're going to be worried about parenting. So we've got to get all of those things in order before they leave, or concurrently when they do, to make sure that their life is not harder after they separate.
Yeah. Now, I've always heard that if somebody leaves the home, deserts the home, that the other person can, if it's not done legally,
they can claim abandonment.
They can claim abandonment, and they actually come out better in a divorce proceeding.
Okay.
Is that true?
That's not quite true.
Okay.
We still do have abandonment in North Carolina, and that's just when one spouse moves out. That's abandonment. But we also have constructive abandonment, which is where when we're in the home, we're saying things like, you're useless, you're no good to me, or we just don't talk to our spouse. We no longer have a relationship with them. Those things are called fault under our statute, just like cheating or gambling or wasting away what I call your children's inheritance. And if you're committing fault, those are important factors for alimony, which is cash flow needs. We're trying to meet those cash flow needs through alimony or payments by one spouse to another.
Okay. And so these payments take place during a separation as well?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Well, why would somebody want to have a legal separation rather than try to do it?
Well, let me first describe what a legal separation is.
Okay.
We call a separation a legal separation from the day that one party moves out of the house and one party intends that separation to be permanent. That's actually a legal separation. Now, why do they need to come to an attorney and have an agreement, though? And the answer is that without an agreement in place, we don't know what's going to happen with children. How are they going to be parented? Who's going to visit with them? When does each parent have time with the children? We don't know how cash flow is going to be handled. We hear about child support, but how does it get set up? Those are the things that a legal separation agreement through an attorney can do for you. And to make sure that we know who's going to live in the house, who's going to live in an apartment, and how are all the bills going to get paid.
Okay. So a legal separation does not necessarily mean that we're going to end up in divorce.
Absolutely, and I think that's a great point.
Okay.
We want to make sure that parties that come in have a roadmap for not only what is their separation going to look like, but what's their reconciliation going to look like. We want to have a point in the road where we get back together and we start to do that.
Do you think if they came to you sooner, that there would be a better chance of reconciliation at the end?
If you don't have a roadmap, you don't know where you're going. And so if you don't have the map at the end and the point when you're going to get back together, it's going to get farther apart.
Okay. Well, we have just been thrilled to have you, and I want to thank you for what a blessing it is to have you on partnering together with us. Again, because when people have no other recourse, no other rational recourse to take, then thank goodness that we have someone we can refer them to. And even when it's over our heads as pastors, and how we can, we can't get in the middle and do all the stuff that lawyers can do. We can't say, set up this legal separation type thing. We can refer to them, and we know that they are on board with us as far as what they believe, the fact that they believe in marriage, that they're believing that they're trying to save marriages rather than end them. And so it's a blessing. Thank you to you and to your associates for working together with us.
Thank you.
We're Steve and Connie Corona. We're the senior pastors at Living Word Family Church in Raleigh. And right now we're in the middle of a series on the power of your words. The power of your words is very important. Jesus said that what you speak, you're going to have. So this is what we're in the middle of right now. Bring your family out to church this Sunday. Go to our website at www.lwfc.org for information and for directions. We want to see you this Sunday.
Well, now once we have given you, or I have referred somebody to you and you've taken them on, a lot of times you will do what is called mediation. Is that what you call it?
Well, let me backtrack over what
Okay.
the process is.
Okay.
So someone will come into our office, and we will sit down with them, and we'll go over not only exactly what their situation is, but what the law says about their situation and what we think would happen in the worst case scenario, which is the divorce. Then we start to talk to them about the process, and there's really three. They can go to court, which we call litigation, and they can spend $10,000 to $60,000, which we don't advise. Or they can try to do this outside of court, maybe with a mediator and their attorneys, and we all go to a neutral party who tries to work this all out. But what we like to do with Christians, because we have a unique view on the world, is we like to do collaborative law. And in collaborative law, the first thing we do is we contract not to go to court. We're not going to go.
Oh, you contract.
That's
you
absolutely
sign a
right.
contract.
We sign a pledge.
Okay.
It's called a
All right.
collaborative pledge, and we say we're not going to court. The second thing we do is we sit down in a team-building atmosphere, and we're going to put notebooks together, not only of what's important for the children, what's important for the cash flow or the financial needs, what's important about property, so that the children both have a home and everywhere where both parents are. We're going to talk about separating, and we're going to make a plan for that, as well as getting back on the roadmap. Now, how we do this once we're in the collaborative process is that we have four-way meetings where everybody's involved. Both attorneys, both clients all come in, we sit down. Sometimes, and here's the important part, we have to have people from the outside help us. So if the parties have a church family, it's important sometimes to get their pastor involved, to come in as a neutral party to talk to them about how do we want to set up parenting? How do we want to define the roadmap to reconciliation? We set up date nights. We set up time with the children for each parent and family nights. And we have to have everybody sign on to the same plan, which is we're going to reconcile. If they can't even get on the same plan to reconciliation, we're not going to have a reconciliation. And having those other parties come in and having some accountability really helps.
Okay. Well, now, let me give you a scenario. Suppose you were talking a few minutes ago about one that is wasting money or spending the children's inheritance. In other words, maybe one spouse is gambling away the money, or maybe they're just getting involved in things that are wasting money, and they're sneaking money away and spending it without the other partner's knowledge. And this person wants to save their marriage, but they've got this situation going on. Then this process that you're talking about would be an ideal way for them to work through that, because they've tried maybe working through this process and it's not getting anywhere. It's just causing that person to be more secretive and more
So for example, in that situation, what we're going to do is we're going to, number one, address the critical problem, which is we probably can't stay together right now because you're spending all the money.
Yeah.
There's no money for the rest of the things. I don't have money to tithe. I don't have money to take the children out to Chuck E. Cheese when I want to go. All right, so now we're going to separate and we're going to divide up the finances. So that one party, the party maybe who's got the children and the home, is going to have their financial needs met. And the other party is going to have some money, and if they blow that money, they spend it all up, that's all they have. They no longer have the other parties, maybe it's the wife who's not spending money, they no longer have the wife and the children's money. That's with them.
Okay.
Then we're going to have to bring in a financial person, somebody who makes a budget, who sets them up and gives the other spouse some spending money. But you and I both know that overspending is usually a sign of something else. Something's wrong spiritually and in their heart. And so if the parties will agree to maybe attend church together where they can still sit on the same pew and really start attending classes together about finances, that's going to help us when we start to move back into going back together and putting our finances back together, because we're going to have to set this house back up as one.
Okay.
And we've got to fix that problem first.
Is it even feasible to do that with them in the same house, since finances are the only problem that they have?
It is feasible. But the problem is that you've got to, when you're in a situation where somebody's spending money recklessly, generally what we have to do is fix the other spouse's anxiety. And the only way to do that is to divide up their finances. And sometimes living in two separate places helps because it gives them both an independence, and it allows the spouse who's running through money to realize they can't pay their light bill if they're gambling. Now that they have taken care of the children's needs and their spouse's needs, the parties who have gone without during their overspending, now they're the ones who are suffering. And I think sometimes that's an important part of the process.
What about if there's a spouse that needs to be in a program to overcome addiction, drug addiction or alcohol addiction, and they go into this long treatment program? Is that a good time for a legal separation?
I think it is. I think that sometimes there is already a legal separation there because one party's no longer lived in the house. So if we start to treat that as a separate time for them, and not only is one spouse in treatment then, but we need to have both spouses in treatment. We need to have the spouse who's staying behind to be in some treatment so that when they both come out, they don't probably need to move right back in together. They need to have their own separate time for a while to learn how to live with not only the chemical dependency, but also the issues and the emotional things around that, but then to start moving back together. And we've got to have treatment partners for that. Sometimes we have actual psychologists, and they come to the collaborative meetings, and they sit down and they say, well, here's what husband's feeling. Here's what wife's feeling. Let's make sure that we all understand that. So it's an important thing to have everybody on the same page.
Wow. I'm so glad to have you on board with us. I'm Connie Corona. Work on your marriage this week. It's worth it.